Reports of random parcels being delivered to homes across the country have been triggering quite a bit of public concern, while a presidential call for measures to better protect teachers at schools prompts fresh debate over the state of the academic arena here in the country. So what is believed to have driven these dubious deliveries? Why has President Yoon Suk-yeol urged efforts to protect teachers at local schools? Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, are leaders of South Korea, Japan and China poised to meet? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It's that time of the week yet again when we revisit these stories here that made international headlines as well. For more on this, I have Malene Jensen here in the studio with me. Malene, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Matthew Weigand with us. Matthew, it's good to have you back.
Yes, it's good to be here again.
Right, Malene, we'll start with you. Let's begin with some of the national headlines here that were covered by the foreign media as well. Now, reports of random parcels being delivered to homes nationwide were filed with local authorities in recent days. Could you tell us a bit more about these reports?
Yes, alone on Friday, almost 1,000 reports were filed to local police all over Korea about people having received these mysterious parcels. And while most of the parcels, they contained cheap products like lip balm, or they were completely empty, there was also one parcel in Ulsan that was delivered to a welfare center that contained some kind of poisonous gas that made the people who opened it feel like they had trouble breathing, or that they felt like dizziness. And nobody really knows much more about these parcels, except that it seems that many of them came from Taiwan. However, when police has investigated more into it, it seems that Taiwan was only a stopover for the parcels and that they actually come from mainland China. And initially, the police feared that this was some kind of weird terrorist attack, and there was a lot of reports about not opening the parcels. If you had not ordered a package and you had something delivered to your house, you should report it to the police. However, since no one has gotten severely hurt, it doesn't appear to be a terrorist attack anyway, but no one really knows what has been going on.
Right. As of now, local authorities have been talking about a brushing scam, probably. Matthew, I understand there was a similar event in the U.S. a few years back. Could you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. Actually, there have been several that have been reported, but the one that really sticks out in a lot of people's minds was back in about 2020, early 2020, there were a lot of reports of people getting seeds in the mail. There were like unsolicited, little small packages that would show up in people's mailboxes. They would be labeled as having earrings or necklaces or other small pieces of jewelry inside the package. But when the package was opened, there were little seeds. And from the way the story goes is that a lot of people were receiving these packages in the UK around the same time that they were receiving them in the US. And a lot of people in the UK who were talking to each other online, like in gardening forums and things like that, were started to mention that they were receiving weird packages of seeds in the mail from China, and they didn't know what was going on. And they tried to contact the media or contact authorities, and it took several months for anyone to actually care about it. But in the US, it was about in June and July of 2020, and if you remember, that was about the same time when the coronavirus pandemic was just starting. Everyone was paranoid. People were washing their groceries. No one knew what was going on. And everyone was being required to stay home, most of them. And then you're staying home, you're wondering about the world, why has everything gone crazy? And also you start receiving seeds in the mail. So understandably, a lot of people got really extra paranoid. And they started reporting these seeds packages to the authorities. And in the US, the organization of the government is very decentralized for a lot of things like this. People would report these to state authorities in Washington or Texas or Oklahoma. And they received a lot of different and contradictory information. Some state governments were advising them to just throw them away if they didn't care about them, and while other governments were saying that they should put them in an oven and cook them at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes to make sure they were dead, just in case something bad would happen. So there was a lot of confusion and there was a lot of worries and paranoia. There was a report of one guy in Ohio who planted his seeds just to see what would happen. And they grew. He used some fertilizer with them. They grew quite quickly. And a large, strange fruit came out of the vine of one of the plants. And he opened it up and it smelled sweet. But he decided not to eat it because he didn't know what it was. And eventually he turned it over to his state authorities and they examined it and found it to be Chinese watermelon. So the seeds were not dangerous or not lethal, but they were unknown and people treated them in that way for a long time. Eventually there were some reports that there were about 20,000 different packages of seeds that showed up all over the US in states from Florida to Alaska, Washington and Texas, and they ended up just being seeds. And they were mislabeled. They were labeled as jewelry most of the time. And as you mentioned earlier, there was probably a brushing scam in which the delivery of the package is the least important part of the scam. What they're really trying to do is pretend like they are delivering one thing when they're delivering another and get good reviews on some online e-commerce site for their successful delivery of whatever it is they were saying they were trying to deliver.
Right, indeed. Here, local authorities, like I mentioned earlier, are also talking about an innocuous marketing strategy, probably a brushing scam for now, that is. But initially, though, here in the country, Matthew, there was quite a bit of fear, which was prompted by memories, I believe, of the mail bombs back in the year 2018, which was sent to former US presidents and prominent Democrats. Could you tell us a bit more about that frightening episode?
Yes, that was another frightening episode from my own country. That seems to happen a lot these days.
Right.
It was 2018, a couple years before that, and it was during the midterm elections when senators and representatives in the US are elected, but not the president. And there were a total of 16 packages that were found that had been sent through the mail, and the packages were the most suspicious kind of packages that you could find because inside the packages was an actual pipe, and inside the pipe was explosive material, and also inside the package were batteries connected to a timing device like a watch or something like that. And they were sent to many Democratic Party politicians and critics of the current president at the time, Donald Trump. So there were packages that were sent to Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, some US Democratic senators, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, who you may recognize as the current president and vice president. And they were also sent to people like George Soros, who is a noted politically minded financier of many elections, and also the CNN World Headquarters in Atlanta. So it can be noted that none of the bombs were successful, and there was actually some doubt whether or not they could be successful. And after the person who sent out all the packages was arrested, he personally testified that he wanted to use the packages to intimidate, but not to actually hurt anyone, which it may be, maybe it's true or maybe it's something you just say after you get caught. There's no way to tell.
Right, we would not know for sure then. Meanwhile, Malene, despite South Korea's, that is, standoff with North Korea, pundits say the threats of terrorism here in the country are relatively low. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree with that. And it is because North Korea has no recent history of terrorist attacks. So even though North Korea do seem like a threat, more or less of a distant threat though, I think that the reason why South Korea is unlikely to experience terrorist attacks compared to other nations is that many of the problems that are in Korea are social or economic problems. So, for example, it might be the wealth gap, it might be gender equality, but that is a problem within Korea itself and within Koreans, meaning that it does not really affect the interests or it doesn't really catch the eye of terrorist groups. Whereas, for example, in Europe or even in America as well, sometimes some of the problems that are in society, they target a particular religion or a particular ethnicity or minority. And then it's suddenly the majority against the outsiders who might be foreigners or might have some values that are shared by foreigners and by foreign terrorist groups, which can more easily make the countries a target for terrorist attacks. For example, in Denmark, where I'm from, we have had several attempted terrorist attacks in Denmark, and many of them can be counted back to the beginning of the 20th, or like this century, where we had these drawings of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. And because of these drawings appeared in a Danish newspaper, they caught the eyes of a lot of Muslims in Denmark, who then shared them abroad. So these drawings actually went viral, you could say, even though it happened 20 years ago, making Denmark a huge terrorist attack, a huge terrorist goal, where we had a lot of people from Muslim countries burning off the Danish flags, attempting to make terrorist attacks in Denmark. And we also had one successful attack on a church in Copenhagen, which was a Jewish church, by the way, not a Christian one, even though Denmark is a Christian country. So I think because South Korea do not have these big issues with religion or with a particular group, because even though we do see racism in Korea, even though we do see, especially in Daegu, there is a lot of resistance against Muslims and against the Islam churches, but even despite of this, it's very minor compared to the bigger problems that are in Korea right now.
Right, and of course efforts to ensure to be tolerant, that is, to ensure a tolerant community continues here in the country as well. Matthew, moving forward, President Yoon Suk-yeol in this particular week has called for efforts to better protect the rights of teachers within their classrooms. Now, his call comes amid the shocking suicide of a teacher in her classroom last week. What do you propose to perhaps safeguard the interests of teachers as well as students, of course, in the learning environment?
Well, first I'd like to say that that was really a true tragedy, and I was very shocked and saddened to hear about that. And it kind of hits a little bit close to home as well, because my mother has been a teacher for her whole life. She's retired now, but she was a teacher in an elementary school, and eventually she became a principal in an elementary school setting. And now she has successfully retired, having changed the lives of thousands and thousands of children through the years. And it was especially tragic to hear that someone had missed out on that opportunity by being influenced in order to take their own life. This whole situation was a kind of a series of surprises for me when I was investigating it, actually, because even though I've been in Korea and consider myself to be somewhat of a Korean scholar and somewhat of a student of Korea, I did not know that parents could sue teachers directly and do sue teachers directly or directly interact with teachers in order to influence them or pressure them into doing something different in their classrooms. Because based on my anecdotal and just kind of like sideline experience in the educational system via watching my mother's career, I always just assumed that there would be like some sort of institutional check or balance in between a teacher and a student and a teacher and the student's parents. So what I assumed to be the case just didn't seem to be the case in Korea, and so I would encourage, if my personal advice was listened to, that a school institution or a school district or the organizational structures of a school should shield a teacher from this kind of pressure or retaliation from private citizens, whether they are parents of teachers in the school or just some random person on the street that wants to take it out on a teacher because they got a C in a class a long time ago or something like that. Teachers should be protected by the institution that they work for. And in many ways, a teacher could be said to be an extension of the government, because the school system is, the educational system is always something that is a responsibility of local and regional and even a national government. And so a lot of times teachers can be considered to be like the most local and most immediate representative of a country's government, of their culture, of their whatever they are as a country can be said to be embodied by each of the teachers in that country.
Right.
So not only should the institution that they work for, the school work for, but I think the government should also support them and have their back and provide some separation and some insulation from private citizens who may wish them harm.
Right, which is why the Union administration has called for measures, tangible measures, to better protect the rights of teachers within the classroom setting. That being said, Malene, what can be done, in your view, to better protect schools as a whole from violence in all its forms?
Well, first of all, I would like to say I completely agree with Matthew that it's very, very important that the educational institutions take care of their teachers and all of their staff, really, because we can see bullying in any form. And even if it's children bullying an adult, it can still be very, very hard. And if you're in that environment every single day, it can really tear on your psyche. However, I also think in South Korea as a general, there is a big problem with bullying. It's not just bullying from students to teachers or from students' parents to teachers. It's also student to student. And every single year we see students committing suicide or students hurting themselves. Students have to be taken out of school because of bullying or because of pressure. And I think already now the South Korean educational system is putting so much pressure on their students to achieve a high grade, to get into a good high school, to get into a good university, and eventually get into a good job. The entire South Korean society is built upon pressuring youngsters, which is really, really terrible, because when people are pressured and when people are stressed, they become capable of doing things that they might not have done if they were in a more chill and more relaxed environment. So I think that's where the root of the problem actually is, that Korea needs to change the way they shape their institutions, their educational institutions, because when students are not pressed, their parents might be less pressed, and they will not put pressure on the teachers. So all of this, which is also resulting in so much violence towards teachers, towards students, that could disappear if South Korea decided to let loose a little bit more of their education, which would have to mean like an entire change of the South Korean culture, also including companies, including the government, including education. So it's very sad to say, but I don't think this is a problem that can be solved easily or quickly. I think it's a very, very deep-rooted problem in Korea specifically.
Right, but on a bright side though, the sad event itself has sparked the need for more productive dialogue on the matter with regard to those here in the country. Matthew, on the diplomatic front, neighboring Japan, well, media reports out of neighboring Japan claim that China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called for high-level trilateral talks, including South Korea. That being said, what would be the implications of a three-way summit including South Korea, Japan, and, of course, China?
Well, one of the most obvious implications would be more of a return to normalcy after the COVID pandemic, because there hasn't been a three-way summit, a trilateral summit between these countries since 2019, since before the world went on pause. So you could say that it would be like similar to the way that now I can go into a restaurant and see my friends' smiling faces without me and also them being covered with masks. It's like, it just feels like everything's coming back to normal. Japan, Korea, and China are talking together. We can ride the subway without any special protections. Everything is back to normal. But there's also, of course, what they would talk about at a trilateral summit. There has been some significant changes in all three of these countries recently, because the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and some other policies that have been set up by the Biden administration has a lot of companies in each of these three countries scrambling to change the way that they do business. For instance, the Biden administration has said that they're going to restrict the export of very high level and very complex semiconductors to China, to any Chinese company. And they will also frown on any company that is not an American company that also gives China the semiconductors that they are looking for. China needs to import the very small scale semiconductors in order to do a lot of the other industries, like they want to do autonomous driving in cars like everyone else does. They want to do electric vehicles. They want to create drones. They want to do all of these high-tech industries that everyone is looking into, including lots of companies in South Korea. But without the extremely small 14 nanometer or less computer chips, which are basically all of the recent chips that have come out, that they might not be able to be leaders or even contenders in these sectors of technology that they want to be. Also, according to the Inflation Reduction Act, the US has heavily changed the way companies are wanting to produce electric batteries that can be used in electric vehicles, and also the way that they produce electric vehicles themselves. Because the US is going to restrict the import into the US of any electric batteries that has been made in countries that are deemed as foreign entities of concern, which includes China and some other countries as well, but not every country makes batteries. So, and just to be on the safe side, a lot of companies that are getting into electric vehicles are getting into battery production, like Panasonic in Japan, or Hyundai or SK On in Korea, and a lot of other companies as well. They want to make sure that there's no doubt that the production process of their batteries and also the materials that they use to make their batteries are not associated with China, so that they're not excluded from the lucrative US market for electric vehicles. So there was actually Panasonic, which is a Japanese company, of course. They are actually building an electric vehicle battery plant in Oklahoma in the US. SK On and Hyundai have a joint venture to build an electric battery plant in Georgia. And there are other companies in both different countries that are either considering opening up plants in other countries, considering moving their production bases out of China and into maybe Southeast Asia or Europe. There's also some production plants that are being produced in Europe and that are moving to Europe. And I'm sure in a trilateral summit between Japan and China and Korea, they want to talk about these kind of issues.
Right, of course, semiconductors.
So that, maybe some compromise can be found.
Right, here in the region then. All right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition. Matthew, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Malene, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. We return with another session, same time tomorrow. That is Thursday. Thank you for now.